Our Region's Business is sponsored by PNC for the achiever in you. Our Region's Business. Innovation, transformation, momentum, improving our communities and driving technologies that will shape our region for generations. The collaboration that brings vitality, prosperity, and life to living. Stay with us for the coming half hour as we examine in depth our region's business. Now, here's your host, Bill Flanagan.
Today on Our Region's Business, why a healthy healthcare business should be concerned about sustainability. Plus how the Fairmont Pittsburgh's gone to the dogs, or at least to one very special canine. But first, Adrift. It's an apt description of the state of our national economy and perhaps the national mood. It's also the title of a new book that captures the national economic malaise and features our region as part of the solution. The book's called Adrift, Charting Our Course Back to a Great Nation. Steve Beschloss is the author, and welcome. Good to have you here in Pittsburgh.
Bill, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, I should mention, though, you're actually no stranger to our region.
That's true. I actually was here all the way back in the 1980s. It was actually my very first newspaper job at the Beaver County Times. So I remember those times quite warmly, but of course at a time when the city was and the whole region was facing the collapse of the steel industry.
Yeah, you talk about a malaise. That was a defined malaise back then. It was really a challenging time here.
Well, indeed, and I have to say, when that happened, I really wondered, would Pittsburgh be able to turn things around? So I'm happy to be coming back at this time and actually seeing that the resources in the city, the sort of the assets and all the sort of leadership happened that was able to actually turn things around.
Yeah, unfortunately for America as a whole, we don't seem to be, at least at this moment, able to find that within ourselves as a nation.
Well, it's discouraging, and the reason my co-author and I, Bill Harris, we began working on the book is we had a strong sense that America was at risk of becoming a second-rate nation, economically, politically, and educationally, and we saw that America's political leaders, rather than sort of banding together to try to solve problems, seem to be mired in partisan warfare. So we just felt it was really important to kind of take a look factually, look back over our recent history and figure out what happened exactly and really what do we do about it.
Well, you think about the way the greatest generation teed things up in the 40s and 50s after the war. Somehow the baby boomers took control and we seem to have lost our way. How do you think that happened?
Well, of course, as you suggest, I mean, America was at a point of economic preeminence in the world after the Second World War. We had the GI Bill, which really created a stable middle class. Millions of returning veterans were able to get jobs, were able to go to school, were able to own homes. It really built a structure that made it possible for us to prosper for really many decades. The same thing happened with the development of, after Sputnik, where the President Eisenhower focused on putting resources into education and math and science and the building of NASA and DARPA, a government agency that invested in innovation and research and development. And all of those kinds of things really laid a foundation for the world we live in now. But of course we hit a point where Americans began to get comfortable with the idea we're number one, we're the best in the world, and I think that there was a lot of comfort and complacency that resulted from that.
No, we even won the Cold War, so the Soviets were no longer there to be our primary rivals.
Yeah, and I think, of course, we're happy that we no longer have this sort of superpower Cold War going on. On the other hand, Americans, I think, have been accustomed to having an external enemy that's a sort of defined force to focus against. And what happened was, I think, is that by 1989 and then 91, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we saw that Americans still having that same impulse, a lot of that energy was turned away from the world outside our borders, and it began to be focused on Democrats versus Republicans and Americans against Americans.
So I know you feature Pittsburgh in the book. Why did you come here, and what do you think what lessons can our region teach the rest of the country?
Well, I did come to Pittsburgh, and I have to say I sort of put it in the context of looking at Detroit, and I looked at Detroit because here was a city that focused on one single industry and really at its own misfortune. If everything goes wrong, dare I say, that could have been Pittsburgh, but instead you had a city and you had a region where you had civic leadership and you had people that were thinking about what are our assets. We've obviously seen 150,000 people that have left. We've seen 100,000 people that have lost jobs. We've seen the collapse of a dominant industry, but what are our assets? And I think there there was a focus on that at a time where the decline really could have been inevitable. And instead you had people saying, how do we actually begin to look more to the long term? You know, there was, as you know, there was a Strategy 21 report that happened in 1985. Well, it was looking at the 21st century, you know, 15 years into the future, and saw, you know, what it could do to be able to put in place, take advantage of the well-known eds and meds, but beyond that, use those as assets that help to resonate with other industries to really rebuild the city and the region, and that's been good for everybody.
Well, and in fact, and great assets as it turned out. It wasn't, although Pittsburgh was certainly the steel city in its heyday, but we always had a lot of other assets as well. But the one thing Pittsburgh's had, going back 70-some years, is really strong civic leaders who've really cared about this community, and they've been willing to put their personal and professional reputations on the line. They've been willing to write checks. They've kind of done what they've had to do for the good of the community. Do you see that spirit for the nation as a whole? Can this really be applied to given the current political environment in the United States?
Well, that loyalty, and that affluence, where the richest Pittsburgh people, the richest Americans, say we have a responsibility to invest in our country. I mean, this is something right now I think that the country is debating over. You know, should the richest Americans participate in helping us to develop? And well, I think that they should. I think we all should. But it means creating something that we talk quite a bit about in the book, is this idea of common purpose. And that really does mean not only having leaders who say, you know, it's not good enough just to be appealing to a base, it's not good enough just to be focusing on fundraising for next election, but it's important to think about what are the solutions that are not simply Democrat solutions or Republican solutions, but are common sense solutions that can pull from across the political spectrum. I mean, there's not enough of that kind of thinking going on. Along with that, of course, the responsibility is not just on the politicians, it's also on Americans to vote and to participate. And you know, the problem is we have 1 out of 10 registered voters who participates in primary elections, if that. That translates into the extremes on the left and the right, who are really defining and in many ways hijacking the debate. That's not good for the country.
All right, well, a lot more in the book. Fascinating account of what's, and other good examples across the United States, and some very hopeful signs as well. You can look to the regions maybe for the solution. Steve Beschloss, the book is called Adrift. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Bill, thank you so much.
Yeah. And next up, sustainability in healthcare and the benefits for the bottom line. Stay with us.